There are a number of areas in which choices are made when putting moving images together. The first of these is mise en scène. This term has been borrowed into English from the French. Its literal meaning is that which is placed in the scene. Every person or thing in a shot, or for a print ad, a still image, has meaning. Choices have been made about what to place where. You're maybe already on the ball and recognising that this relates directly to paradigmatic and syntagmatic choices. Remember the Save the Children Second a Day ad we considered earlier in the module, the one that makes us reassess our approach to the effect of conflict in Syria on children by putting a young, white, affluent British child in that role. Let's watch it again. This time, focus on the mise en scène. Consider the subtle and, as the ad progresses, not so subtle shifts in the mise en scène that cause us to recognise that something is increasingly amiss. As an aside, it's also worth thinking back here to dramatic irony. The fact that we as the audience can see the changes in the child's situation via the shifting mise en scène before the child herself is aware of them is a good example of dramatic irony, used in this case to make us recognise all the more the vulnerability of the child.
Happy birthday to you.
Make a wish.
Granny.
Hello.
Have you done your homework?
Ada.
For a general strike.
Ready or not? Here it comes.
Violent clashes with British.
Live ammunition against.
Deserve to get shot.
Have a nice day, Mum.
Airstrikes on rebel position.
We are going to stay.
What's happening?
Go.
Heavy fighting in Richmond.
Where are we?
Rebel forces advance.
Daddy!
Happy birthday to you. Make a wish, darling.
How something is filmed can give us an additional layer of meaning and encourage us to read it in a specific way. Different types of film stock have become codes with different meanings. For example, we read soft focus shooting as romantic or dreamy. Actually, due to the consistent use, or we might even say overuse, of soft focus in more traditional romantic movies and in ads trying to give a romantic impression, soft focus has come to be viewed as quite cheesy. It tends therefore to be used quite sparingly or precisely to create humour from the cheesiness. We read black and white film stock as nostalgic, classic and timeless. Does this point remind you of anything? We talked about similar things when exploring connotations and symbols, didn't we? So now we have the full nuanced understanding of how black and white means what it means. The place of black and white film stock in the cinematic code gives it connotations of classicness and timelessness. And one step further than that, because attaching black and white to nostalgia, classicness and timelessness has become a thing, an approach that is now proactively used by filmmakers to have this effect, we can say it is now symbolic of those things in the sense that it has become a recognised convention. Relatedly, we read grainy film stock, as we might call it, as old because of the limited choices filmmakers used to have to shoot their film with. This short clip explains more about this.
Think about Instagram filters. Designed to look like old cameras and film stocks, these filters mimic objects that most Instagram users won't ever touch. As Bridle says, putting a filter on your digital photo is an attempt to codify that image as memory, to wrap it up in something solid and historical that calls back to a time before everything was fluid and changing and impossible to hold on to. In this way, our nostalgia becomes an aesthetic, and in film, one of the features of that aesthetic is grain. Film grain is a texture in processed film that has the appearance of tiny particles moving around randomly in the image. The amount of grain has to do with the speed and size of the film stock and the amount of light being used. During the era when film was the only choice, many photographers and filmmakers tried hard to eliminate this aspect of film processing. But it was always a part of cinema, especially in low-budget independent movies using smaller film stocks like 16mm and without access to big professional studio lighting. These days, it's easy to tap into that indie aesthetic by using grain. The grain itself is loaded with all these associations that reach back into the history of film.
And we read shaky footage as authentic because we presume it has been shot on a personal device. In current times a phone, but in the past it could have been a camcorder. We therefore think of it as innocent, if you like, as not thought through in ways that would manipulate the viewer, as professional footage might be. The Save the Children ad we just watched a few minutes ago gives this effect in places, which makes us respond even more to the gritty reality of it. How a shot is framed also constructs meaning, because it controls what can be seen in the shot and from which point of view. Think of how you frame things with your hands or by moving your phone around until you find the perfect shot you want to take. Framing can be controlled in two ways. The first is distance. A film scene, or for our purposes a traditionally shot ad, tends to start with a long shot. That just means a shot that is taken from far away from the subject matter. This is sometimes called an establishing shot because it establishes the scene, giving us an overview before then focusing in on various aspects. Let's watch our Specsavers ad again. This is a good example of this type of shooting, which is very traditional and film-like. While you're watching it, try to focus on the shots of different distances and where they come in the narrative. Did you notice that there are a few establishing shots at the beginning so that we know what sort of a setting we're in, and then there are varying degrees of attention paid to different people, animals, objects, and situations? Let's break down shot distance a bit further. Once we've had the establishing shot, we then usually have a range of close-ups of various kinds. Here are examples of each of them. Medium close-ups bring our attention to one specific character. The Save the Children Second a Day ad we've looked at a couple of times makes good use of medium close-ups. They encourage us to focus on the child, particularly because of the consistent use of the same positioning or almost the same positioning of the child in each shot. However, the shot is not too close up as to disallow us to focus at all on the background. It is just right for us to be able to catch snippets of how the child's world is changing in the background. We learn from watching many films that close-ups intend us to focus on the character's emotions. If we see an extreme close-up, we know that we either need to pay very close attention to the area focused on because something is going to happen there, or that that thing is very important to the narrative, or that it is symbolic of something. Think about the Specsavers ad, which focuses right in on the farmer's hands and the shearing clippers. This signifies to us that this object or activity is going to be of great importance to the narrative, which of course we see that it is as the ad progresses. Films and ads differ from one another a fair bit in terms of distance in shot framing. Extreme close-ups are relatively rare in film, but we see them in advertising a fair bit. This is not surprising at all because the whole point of advertising is to make us focus on a product, to make us think, or to shock us. On the other hand, establishing shots are not common in ads, though they do occur, as we saw in the Specsavers ad. They are pretty rare for two reasons, I think. Firstly, ads have a very short time to make a point, so they get to that point very quickly without faffing around, to use a technical term, with establishing shots. But some advertisers decide to go quite traditional with their ad, using essentially a short narrative film for the purposes of advertising the product. This is what we saw in the Specsavers ad, and it's common also in Guinness ads, for example. Framing also controls the angle from which we view the people and objects in the shot, the vantage point, if you like. Height and angle can suggest power relations between people or objects. A high angle shot looking down on the character from a higher point suggests that that character has relatively less power, and a low angle shot where the camera is set lower than the character and looking up at them makes the character look relatively more powerful. This is common in film, unsurprisingly, because power mismatches and struggles are a great source of narrative. Apart from the type of ad I've mentioned that takes on the style of a short film, though, in advertising it is much more usual for the angle to be level. This makes a lot of sense because if you think about it, as an advertiser you are trying to speak on a level to your consumer. You don't want to make them feel you're above them and looking down on them, and likewise it most often won't make sense for you to make them feel more powerful than you. That'll make them feel good, of course, but they want to think you're authoritative and know what you're talking about for them to want to buy your product or service. However, we do sometimes see interesting angles of shot in some ads where we're not being addressed directly, where we're a fly on the wall, as it were, a third-party observer. In those cases, it is sometimes useful to create a power relationship between the characters in the ad for dramatic purposes. Check out this dairy milk ad. It creates a beautiful relationship between the shopkeeper and the little girl. Not a power relationship as such, because the shopkeeper is being very enabling of the little girl. What the use of camera angles does do is draw our attention to just how little the little girl is, and thus just how sweet it is for her to be doing what she is doing for her mum. Let's watch it. While you're watching it, look out too for any choices that have been made in relation to the other elements of cinematic code that we've looked at.
Sorry.
Come on.
Yeah, that's me. Yeah.
I'd like a bar of chocolate, please. It's for my mum.
Your change.
Happy birthday, Mum.
There's a glass and a half in everyone.
Did you notice the angles? And did you notice also pertinent choices having been made regarding mise-en-scène and style of shooting? the clothes of the characters and the settings, the catering workplace and the public transport, signify a working class, non-affluent background. There is no fancy lighting in the ad. It is all very naturalistic to the extent that we notice even more the evening sun on the little girl's face when she's standing outside the school, so that we notice the time of day more and thus how hard the mother works. The camera work too contains handheld elements that make the shots quite shaky in places, which makes us read the situation as a realistic, authentic one, perhaps one that we recognise either in ourselves or in others. All of this works together to make the little girl's actions all the more emotionally affecting. Now we'll talk about editing. Editing refers to how shots are put together to make up a film, or, in our case, an ad. We are so used to watching films, TV programmes and adverts that we barely even recognise that different shots have been put together, unless there is a purposefully noticeable transition from one to the other. But if we look out for how something is edited, we can see some really quite intricate choices that have striking effects without us even noticing. We are always looking for meaning in things. Just think about the perceptual code and Bart's point about things resembling other things. Audiences therefore tend to assume that there is a connection between shots and thus construct meaning from the relations between them. We are moving image literate enough to know, however, that we should not necessarily read a piece of film as containing every moment of an experience. Indeed, we know they almost always select what to show us. So, when we see the Maltesers ads we've looked at, for example, we know that they are a slice of life, the entirety of a few minutes of the characters' time together. But when we see the Dairy Milk ad we've just watched, we don't think all of the action happens in the time it takes us to watch the ad. We know that we are seeing snapshots of different points in the mother's day. But how do we know the difference? It's all in the mise-en-scène and the script. In the Maltesers ad, we stay in the same setting and we simply see shots from different angles. The scripted conversation continues across the different shots, so we know we are in the same story space, if you like. This might seem super obvious, but it is something we all learn to read as we watch more films and TV programmes and ads. That's why, with the Dairy Milk ad, we recognise the changes in mise-en-scène as shifts to a different point in the day. Pieces of film or ads also don't need to be chronological, as in happening in time order. They can include flashbacks or mix up the sequence of the narrative to keep things interesting. See if you can find any ads that do this, and do let me know. In advertising, we quite often see a device whereby a number of shots are edited together which keep something consistent but shift other things. This signifies to us that we are supposed to read not just a relationship between them but also a similarity. Think about the Right Move ad in which the man makes multiple journeys up and down the stairs. His stance and facial expression are kept consistent, which makes us more clearly recognise the repetition and intensifies the humour and the empathy the audience is encouraged to feel. And think again about the Save the Children Second a Day ad. Keeping the child in the centre of every shot as the mise-en-scène changes behind her encourages us to focus on her changing experience. In the Fairy ad, we have completely different sets of people and we don't read them as all living in the same house or all knowing each other, because their mise-en-scènes are different. But we do read them as being linked thematically because of the words of the song Head, Shoulders, Knees and Toes working across the piece. Likewise, the Nike Dream Crazy ad. Completely different situations are brought together thematically by the use of a voiceover that is not a recognised song like the last one we considered, but has a narrative structure that links them thematically. As in, if you're X, Y or Z, don't be the best runner in your school or picture yourself wearing LBJ's jersey or become a tennis player. And then a positive, become the best runner ever, picture LBJ wearing yours, become the greatest athlete ever. There is a symmetry and consistency to these. This structure makes us recognise that while these are all different scenarios, something similar is being said about all of them. And staying with the Night Dream Crazy ad, it exemplifies that as well as just straightforward cutting from shot to shot, editors can use creative techniques which are codes for different meanings. In this case, something called a mix is used at the end of the ad. With a mix, one shot is superimposed on the other, encouraging the viewer to make a connection between the two things. In this case, the people from the ad are being given status by being presented on the sides of a building, as in suggesting that they should be celebrated and recognised. There is possibly also a metaphorical meaning of the world being one of struggle and overcoming, which again reinforces the American Dream myth we discussed this ad in relation to in a previous video. Finally, we're going to talk about sound. Sound in film, and for our purposes in advertising, is not random. It has meaning. There are two types of sound in film and advertising. Diegetic sound comes from within the story space, for example, characters' speech and the music characters are listening to. Non-diegetic sound comes from outside the story space. For example, music may be used to generate connotations for the audience in addition to those they pick up from the scene, but that is overlaid on the scene. A nice way to think about this is, can the characters in the scene hear the sound or not? Or even imagine yourself in their position and think about whether you could hear the sound or not in that situation. So, in the dairy milk ad, the advertisers have purposefully recorded the sound in a way that includes or maybe even enhances the background sounds of the workplace and the bus. These are diegetic sounds that are part of the characters' lives. Making these so noticeable further adds to the gritty realism presented in the ad. In the Stella Artois ad we watched, the speaking is diegetic and the music is non-diegetic. The characters can't hear the music, it's there for connotative effect to make us, the audience, read the ad in a particular way. Likewise, the Specsavers ad. There are just a few diegetic sounds, for example, the farmer whistling to the sheepdog, and the song is non-diegetic. It's generally safe to say that more diegetic sound will construct more of a realistic and authentic mood, and more non-diegetic sound will construct more symbolism or lifestyle meaning around the product. Just for fun, let's watch a couple of clips from the film The Holiday. I'm almost certain you'll have seen this film because it seems to be on Channel 5 about every 2 weeks, and even more often during the holiday season. You'll remember that Jack Black's character in the movie, Miles, is a film composer, so he has a very high level sense of how sound works, particularly non-diegetic sound. In the first clip, he brings the non-diegetic into the story space and makes it diegetic. He sings film scores humorously, and in doing so plays up the elements of them that make them work so well. In the second clip, we see the process of writing a non-diegetic theme tune to represent a character.
Now let me ask you, have you seen this?
Chariots of Fire, loved it.
Cling, 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 cling. Such a great score by Vangelis. He took electronic scores to a new level. It was groundbreaking. I'm going to test you on this later. Okay, Driving Miss Daisy, Hans. Very unexpected. Do you remember how great it was? Roodle-dee-doo, scroodle-dee-doo, roodle-dee-doo, sassy. Love it. Is this a bad game?
No!
Okay.
Keep going.
Sometimes I get self-conscious about my ra-da-da-da and scraddle-da. Are you embarrassed by this game I've started to play? Okay, it's not elaborate. I can go loud. Ba-dum. 2 notes, and you've got a villain. I don't know what to say about it. Totally brilliant. Uh-oh. Where have you gone, Joe DiMaggio? I bet you didn't know. That was all written for the movie. It was a score, technically.
I did know that one.
Can't go anywhere.
Oh my God. Okay, this one, you have to check this out sometime. The Mission, the score is genius. It just comes from a totally different place. It's like, I can't even, just promise me you'll rent it and listen to it.
Renting.
Thank you. It changed my world. Okay, here it is. Arthur's theme. I think this is really good. I'm serious. I'm making him a CD of this tune. Every time he hears it, it should give him the confidence to walk right out there. Okay?
Yeah.
Here we go. Did I steal this?
John Williams.
I didn't write it, why? Okay, this is it for real.
Okay.
Here we go.
Yep.
Little Arthur and the Knights. Right? It's cheeky.
It sounds like him.
I also wrote one that sounds like you.
You did?
Iris, if you were a melody. I used only the good notes. Iris lives next door to Arthur. He's a doodly-doo. And also a doodly-doo. A scroodly-doo, is it? I didn't know it.
Yeah.
And fruitily-doo. We both said fruitily. I'm not impressed. You are a prodigy, a doodle prodigy.
I do hope you've enjoyed exploring cinematic codes with me. We've really only scratched the surface, and it's already fascinating, isn't it? You could study multiple modules on this stuff and still be interested in going further. If you're particularly interested in this aspect, you could look at some media studies or film studies books or websites to find out more. A couple of books I'd highly recommend are Monaco's How to Read a Film and Bordwell and Thompson's Film Art. Monaco is on its 4th edition and Bordwell and Thompson is on its 12th, which tells you how well respected the books are. Have fun with it!